listening to the Blue Skies Leadership Podcast, featuring discussions with international school leaders about the future of education. The podcast embodies the spirit of reciprocity by sharing strategies and change initiatives from leading schools around the world. Here are your hosts, Dan Kerr and Daniel Mendes.
Dan, I hear you're going recruiting starting tonight.
Yeah, on a plane late tonight off to Dubai for the search fair. And I'm really excited. I don't mind doing those at all. As a matter of fact, it's a lot of fun to meet with prospective candidates and to network. See, I haven't been back to the Middle East in, 21 years. So I'm excited about what that change looks like. And honestly, I like seeing it from both sides of the table. I've done it as a recruiter and I've also done it as a candidate. And I don't know if I want to bring it up for you. You just lived that. You're going through it right now.
Yeah, I'm going through it right now, going through a process that's taking some time, but it's definitely worth it. You know, the one thing that you do when you go to recruit is think about what do you believe in? What have you accomplished? And sometimes you can just take a step back and just be like, wow, I have accomplished a lot and I've done a lot. And it's a great experience. Just know that you got to be calm and measured and just show up authentically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. These fairs, it's so fun to look out over the table and to sort of be in their shoes, thinking that their lives are going to change so immeasurably over the next couple of days. And they really don't know what part of the world they're going to land in and what school. So it's very exciting, anxiety inducing for sure. But let's get to our next guest. We're very excited about this podcast. This episode, we're thrilled to welcome Nancy Lhoest-Squicciarini to the Blue Skies Leadership Podcast. She's here today to share her insights on a topic critical to any school's success, the vital importance of middle-level leadership.
Nancy's career journey is nothing short of inspiring. She dedicated an incredible 31 years to the International School of Luxembourg, witnessing its phenomenal growth from a modest 221 students to a thriving community of 1,300. During her time there, she held various impactful roles, including classroom teacher, department head, assistant principal, and head of community relations.
Yeah, now Nancy is making waves on a global scale, which is true. I've known it because she's been here to SSIS to help us become better. And now she's the head of the middle level certificate program for ECIS, the Educational Collaborative for International Schools. So without further ado, Nancy, welcome to our show.
I am thrilled. You have no idea. This has been the highlight of my week.
Buzzing all week about the opportunity to talk to you. And it just seems like yesterday that you were with us here at SSIS, leading us through a leadership retreat. And it was actually the first couple of days that I arrived here in the country. Just to have a friendly face and someone like you to talk me off the ledge of it was really inspiring. So it's great to see you again. And thank you for joining us.
Dan, thank you so much. It's beautiful to be here.
Well, great. We start each episode with the similar question. It's really going to be fun to see how the perspectives either change or the through lines over time that come out of these answers. But thinking about blue sky leadership and blue sky schools and a vision for what schools might look like moving into the next iteration, where do you think the world of international school is heading? Or maybe more specifically, where do you think it should be heading? And what do you think we should be prioritizing as schools to bring that vision to life? Like, where should we be going as international schools?
The last couple of years, I've been working with different schools. I would say, if we're looking at blue sky thinking of leadership, is really focusing on teacher efficacy. So many schools I'm working with, it really is about how do we get teachers to collaborate? And it's that intentionality of teaching people how to collaborate. We almost think that, okay, if we put a group of educators into a room, they know how to have an impactful conversation with an objective and come out with some type of result. But if we could only I go back to Hattie's work, which I love, teacher efficacy, the number one, let's say, influence of student learning. But I think we've forgotten that leaders need to go back and think about, how do I effectively have a conversation that is impactful, that is engaging, and not as if you're going to a room and everyone is on their phones. Yeah. Functionality is so high, you might as well take a picture of it. And people are wondering why I'm in this meeting. What am I getting out of this meeting? Why are we even talking about this again? Rethinking the basics of how to design a meeting. but it's almost going back to it. I think of Richard DeFore, his Norms of a Meeting that came out like in the 1980s.
Yep.
But yet, how many schools I work with, they're like, we don't have any norms.
Mm-hmm.
And then that leads to dysfunctional behavior. So it's almost blue sky thinking. I'm going to say, go back to the basics.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it reminds me of the work that we're doing here at SSIS and across the world around adaptive schools, right? And having, good protocols in place. And almost as educators and leaders, going back and learning how to learn collaboratively.
When you were speaking, Nancy, I heard being intentional about your meetings, making sure that you have a proper outcome. What do I really want out of these 30 minutes that I have with these people? If you look at how many people are in a room and how much time they've dedicated to being in that room, I really need to spend some time thinking through what the outcome, what the mood, the emotions, everything that needs to happen in order to get the outcome that you need.
Well, that connects to blue sky thinking is that you only have a certain amount of time in the day. And if you're going to give an hour to a meeting, and if you can't utilize that time effectively, then you can have the best laid plans. And if you can't get there because you don't have the capacity to get there, that's a really difficult thing and something that we've missed the boat on, I would imagine.
When I work with leaders about their meetings and how do you get that engagement going back, I tell them, think about these three things. How are you connecting people's hearts in this meeting? Mm-hmm. That's a sense of belonging. What do you want them to feel? How are you connecting their head? That's their thinking. How are you providing provocations? Are you doing inquiry-based prompts with your staff? Or are they sitting there and you could have sent in an email? And the last thing is, what are the hands? What are those takeaways that once they leave that meeting, it would apply to their role? If you can't think of the hands to take away that meeting, don't have the meeting. That's what I mean by, if we're thinking about blue sky, think about the heart, the head, and the hands. How do we elevate that in every collaboration? And that will then elevate that collective wisdom of the group. But right now, people leave meetings, they're like, okay. And I know it might not be very blue sky, but it's fundamental. In order to have those true innovation and true creativity is to have that type of knowing that there's a purpose of why we're here and it applies to my role. Anytime you ask a teacher, what do we need? We need time. We don't have time. We don't have time. So if you have an hour, what's their direct takeaway? And actually ask them, how did this meeting impact either student learning or teacher practice? Yeah. When I was an assistant principal, every meeting, I would end a meeting with those two questions. A Post-it note outside the door. Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how did this meeting impact your role on a scale of 1 to 10? If I got a lot of 4s, I told myself, whoa, that was not a well-designed meeting. And recently on a LinkedIn post, I found a calculator that is used to determine how much time and money was spent during a meeting. I just posted it yesterday. I never saw this before. So you put in the number of people, their approximate salaries.
Oh, wow.
And then they tell you how much money was spent or devoted towards that meeting. I thought it was brilliant.
That is so good. I remember when you worked with us here at the beginning of last year, you talked a lot about this. And if you don't leave a meeting together, either better educators, better people, or with a clearer direction of how anything decision that was made affects student learning, then it was an absolute waste of your time, right? You have to be intentional and you have to come out better for it.
I just love how you made it so simple. Head, hearts, and hands. Nancy, in preparation for this podcast, I stumbled on a quote, and you were quoted as saying, happiest culture is not always the best culture. Can you talk about how middle leaders can cultivate a school culture that fosters healthy communication, even when that involves some conflict?
That quote was in reference to, at times, people have this facade of everything's happy. I use it, that fake smile, like, hi. And then, because they don't have that psychological safety to actually have cognitive conflict. So when you say everyone's so happy, we have no disagreements. Well, is it because people don't feel safe where they can disagree with you with respect? And when thinking about middle leaders, the first thing we talk about is developing that psychological safety. Because we talk about two different types of conflict. There's cognitive conflict, which is usually based upon product or process. That's what you want. I don't understand how we're doing this. Are you sure this is the end result that we want? Really positive. It's energetic. You get these, and it could be spirited. That is not a negative. I'm from New York, I'm spirited. So every time I talk, I'm like, okay, I'm spirited. But then if you have affective, that's usually about status quo. It's usually about hierarchy or something personal. And those are the conflicts that actually can destroy the morale of a team. When we say everyone's so happy, I almost see that as, is it truly, or is it just a facade because they don't have the level of comfort to confront Dan or confront somebody to say, I wasn't comfortable with what you said. And when it comes to middle leadership, when I tell them, when you start a new team, connection before content. I did not think of that phrase. It actually comes from a gentleman named Chad Littlefield. And I'm actually taking a course with him. He's a brilliant facilitator. And he always talks about before you go into any initiatives, before you start bringing up any type of project, you must build connections before you have the content. Because once you have those connections, facilitating the content comes with greater ease.
Yeah, that's a heavy culture shift. I mean, that takes a long time to build that culture, but it needs to be the absolute foundation of how you grow healthy environments in schools. And I think it takes a lot of educational courage to address even the smallest things that you think that you could probably let walk and no one would really notice. But it's the small things that you don't address that end up being big things that turn into either resentments or misunderstandings or miscommunications. I remember my father one time said that true leadership is about being willing to address the things that need to be addressed, even if it's uncomfortable. That's what leadership is. If you can build that culture and make it a healthy culture, I think then that happiness will come into play.
Exactly.
When I worked with the middle leaders, I would tell them you have to start building trust. I mean, that's foundational for psychological safety. There's a great book, I think it's Ken Blanchard, that talked about the ABCDs of trust. And I tell middle leaders, just do that. Just think about A, B, C, D. And they're like, what does that mean? Show that you're able, show that you're believable, show that you're connected and you care, and show that you're dependable. And that's not just for you, that's for everyone on the team to demonstrate those traits to start building that psychological safety. Yeah,
and it connects nicely to the middle level leaders idea, because obviously as a building principal or head of school, you model that behavior first. And then if that can trickle down into your middle level leaders, it spreads and it just becomes part of the ethos of who you are, where people are able to have not hard conversations, but beautiful opportunity talks, as I like to say, in a place where you're presuming positive intent and you are there to really actively listen and get to the root of what an issue potentially is and have those conversations that allow you to drive student learning and teacher instruction forward. That's the place where you need to get. And everybody can model that.
Opportunities to build some trust as well. It can't just be one big event. We should build trust in everything that we do. It's easy to lose trust, but it's hard to build trust.
You don't get a course saying, oh, trust 101.
Right.
You assume just because you get this position, they're going to trust you. And I tell middle leaders, absolutely not. You have to build it with intentionality. So think about, are you showing that you're able? Are you showing that you're believable? Do you have integrity? Are you showing you care? Are you dependable? And it was that type of intentionality that I think many leaders forget. All of us in international schools, we go to one school to another. Just because you were in one school, perhaps in Luxembourg, doesn't mean suddenly when you go to Ethiopia, you're going to be trusted and valued as a leader. You have to build it. And again, I think we tend to dismiss that intentionality of how to build the trust with our teams.
Yeah, and that's a tough lesson to learn as a leader. And if you move from place to place, sometimes you think that what worked in a particular community or a particular context will just translate nicely and scale perfectly. And it absolutely doesn't.
And on the reverse of that, even if just one person is added to your team, it's a brand new team. So that requires a lot of trust building as well, even if only one person's new to the team.
Yep.
Yeah, that's nice. That's actually, it's a great segue. I wanted to ask you a little bit about collaboration, and I'm going to bring in someone's name who I know you love. And one of my favorite people too is Nikki Crush. And I know that you guys worked together for a number of years and were partners in crime, leading schools. So can you talk to me about how you guys were instrumental in promoting a culture of collaboration and distributive leadership in your school? And what were some specific things that you guys did together that that supported the work and to create a similar environment that you wanted around collaboration?
Well, yeah, big shout out to Nikki. I've known her for almost 20 years. She was my principal for almost a decade, just an incredible educator and leader. What Nikki did, first of all, was she modeled distributed leadership. So she wasn't that typical, I don't want to say typical, but she allowed me to lead. And she actually took that, she was in the back. And when I was perhaps making a mistake, she let it happen, which was a good thing. It was a learning experience. So number one, she modeled distributed leadership. So when I worked with middle leaders, she empowered me. There was no micromanaging. That was the first. Number two, what she did was very powerful when it came to leadership so of course, I was part of that senior leadership team. And then she assigned me responsible for all middle leadership in the upper school. So that then provided the middle leaders, number one, a contact point, but also it was my job to model what I was doing with Nikki. And because of this collaboration and this trust, and we also had, I must admit, we had great banter together. And we did it in front of the staff. So she is Cambridge, smart, British, the most eloquent woman I know. I'm from Brooklyn, went to a state school, I'm there. So we had this great banter together. And we did it from the staff. I think we forget you can still have fun and still collaborate. I feel like fun sometimes is a misword that we're not allowed to use. When it came to initiatives, because we first worked on who we were as leaders. So every morning we walked around the building every single day. It was scheduled in our calendar. I did a half. Everyone knew there was no meetings. Nancy walked around and they heard my heels. Here I'm coming. That already showed the staff that that's a non-negotiable. I have to check in. And we had 120 staff. So I might do, the math and science on Monday, Tuesday, drama, maths, social studies. But everyone knew by the end of the week, I saw every staff member minimum 2 to 3 times every week. That somewhat translated to checking in with people. And then when you want to bring in initiatives, they already knew who you were as a leader. So that to me, if you're going to do any takeaway for a new leader coming to a building, walk around it. And you're like, Nancy, so simple. We've heard that 1,000 times. But do you keep to it?
Right.
Parents knew it. Board members knew it. I am not available. And it became a beautiful thing that we did because people just knew they were cared about. We were checking in. So then when we started bringing in initiatives that we knew would be challenging to the staff, for example, we brought in peer visits. Teachers like their silos, don't. But prior to that, we did think about the protocols, the norms, the feedback. We had that established. But getting somebody in your room was a big trust factor. Implementation of peer visits, thinking about even PLCs. PLCs is a term that's been around, 35 years, 40 years. But we tried to make it a celebration. And that's one thing I love that she allowed me to do. I love parties. On Thursday of this week, I have Thanksgiving at my house. I have like 25 people coming over, and that's a small number. But I love celebrations. So the idea of celebrating their work, we forget that, I think, as leaders, where you just say, we're going to do this meeting. We're going to chat. We're going to walk around. We're going to play some really silly games. We're going to get to know each other and celebrate the work you did for peer visits or the accreditation. And I think for Nikki, what was another factor that helped me grow as a leader was that time to reflect. And she met with me, and it was that, I don't know, you talk about a better conversation. She made me a better person. I was very honored that I was very able to be vulnerable without being criticized, which, I've had other principals. And I know this sounds like, it's a typical leadership book, but it really happened. And you can see the impact when you have someone who empowers you like that.
Yeah, I love that.
This is nothing exciting. Sorry, everybody, nothing exciting here, but it was just so beautiful. That's how I learned.
That's actually the word I was going to say. It's beautiful. It was a special time in your life, very important relationship where it was built on trust and growth and care.
I love the word care. I think it's okay to say that we care about an individual in our building. When I think about moving forward with my career, she was my cheerleader. She was the one that I knew would be there when I'd be like, can I go on to doing accreditations? Can I go on to facilitation? And she's like, just try it. Doesn't work. And I'm just like, okay. And I've been fortunate to have many mentors. I had a lovely man named Chris Bowman. I don't know if you know Chris Bowman.
Yeah, legend.
Just a beautiful person. an amazing person in my life. I would say the relationship, Dan said it well, was based upon that trust and also letting me fail. Just letting me try things. And maybe it didn't work, but it was a learning experience for me. And the staff was great because I remember when we had ISA results and I was doing this protocol, way too complicated. And it failed. Like I had 120 people. They didn't know which table they were going to. And suddenly I stopped it and I said, guys, this is not working. And you would think you wouldn't say that. And it actually was the best thing. So I went to the staff and said, what should I do differently? What should we do differently to make this protocol work? And having that conversation with the staff was actually the best part of the meeting. It wasn't going through the data.
You said two things there that really resonated with me, and particularly for middle level leaders or people who are looking to step into leadership, two things that we sometimes often forget to do because of the pace of schools. And one is to slow down enough to celebrate and to take the time to reflect on the good work that you're doing all the time, every day. But it's very easy to let months go by without checking in with your faculty and just celebrating the good work. And that's huge to culture building. And the other thing that you mentioned, which is I've been very fortunate in my life to have some amazing mentors as well, is to see yourself as that person for somebody else. Like if you're a middle level leader looking for someone who's maybe a young teacher to mentor, to be that person who models that collaborative behavior, that trust, that banter, being vulnerable and showing something of yourself to allow them to step into their best selves, I think is something that we can all do regardless of position, title, or where we sit in the organizational structure. And that mentor piece is so big.
Speaking of which, on the other side of this is, what's your advice do you have for middle leaders who aspire to senior leadership positions or teachers jumping into their first leadership position?
Well, I want to repeat what Dan said. Definitely try to get a mentor of someone that you feel you can get some advice you and trust. I would say the second piece of advice, jump on any opportunity to just get involved with perhaps somebody outside your team. There might be a NEAS, a CIS accreditation. Say, I want to be involved with that. You want to lead it. I also think any work that you want to do with the board or being involved with any type of development of strategic planning is something to start seeing if this is something that interests you. But you have to take the initiative. No one's going to tap you on the shoulder, which maybe some people do. I was mentioning before, Michael Anani, who I respect immensely. He wrote a brilliant book on middle leadership. And he talks about the 4 components of effective professional learning. And the first one he talks about is intrinsic. You as the individual, you have to take that initiative to search for those opportunities. He then talks about look within your school. Who could you collaborate within your school to learn from? Mentoring. Then he talks about look within your school communities. For example, in Vietnam, you have so many schools. In Luxembourg, there's only 1 or 2, but look at your network to then perhaps visit schools. And the third, he talks about someone like me bringing in a consultant or someone to do some work from an external perspective. Each one of those 4 are not enough individually. You really need all 4 working together. That intrinsic motivation, looking within your own ecosystem, bringing in some external person to give a different perspective. As a middle leader, think of those 4 and how you can then start nudging away at opportunities in each one of those areas.
Yeah, I love that. Daniel, I'm going to ask this question of you in a second, but I remember being a very young teacher and feeling that I was ready to step into leadership in some capacity, and talking to your point, Nancy, about finding that internal initiative. I remember putting my hand up to be on the PTA or representative. And,
exactly.
And that was my first step into being something beyond my classroom. And I felt a little bit of success with that. And then it became this and this and this. And then it snowballed, but it was that courage to just step into that one thing. Do you remember, Daniel, your first?
I think for me, it was leading a tech strategic plan.
Okay.
And I just put my hand up and said, yeah, I can help do that. At the time, I was teaching a different subject, and it was the start of me becoming an integration specialist for technology. Mm. Just putting up your hand and getting yourself involved. Exactly. I have been on those NEASC accreditation visits, and they are fantastic professional development. Going to see a school that you've never worked at and have them talk about their school in the way that they talk about it, just fantastic professional development. And of course, you meet a whole bunch of great leaders from other schools who are part of the accreditation team. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to network and learn from others.
Yeah, for our listeners out there, everybody has had that first time, or if you haven't yet, then yeah, find the courage, jump in and watch it snowball and watch you sort of grow into your leadership capacity over time. So that leads me to another question, Nancy, if it's okay. You know, you're deeply committed to this work around middle level leadership. And we were kind of wondering from your experience, are there some key traits that effective middle level leaders possess? Is it the relationship building focus? Is it an opportunity to really collaborate well? Like, what are some traits that people could sort of build into and flex that muscle?
Definitely the relationships. That would be key. I also think of their desire to positively impact student learning. That's why we all go into leadership. If it's not, then you're in it for the wrong reason. Is it for ego or it's for anything else, then get out. But you have a desire to make even a further impact in terms of sharing your practices, elevating the practices of your team, and knowing that collective efficacy, if you all work together, how that will then think about influencing the student learners in your school. And that desire to me is the number one. It's always about how can the teachers that I work with even impact the students in my classroom even further. And I want to help them get there. And to me, that's like, that's glorious. That's what you want to hear. When someone says, well, I'm going to be a middle leader because I eventually want to be a principal. And I'm like, okay, then why do you want to be a principal? Yeah. Let's take a step back. What's your rationale? Look at the ecosystem you're in. It is about our community, it is about the learners. And this is just another avenue for you. So it's relationships, it's knowing your impact and knowing that you're almost humble as well. You know, when you have leaders that it's about me, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's use that word less. Could we use we instead of me? Like, could we just take that step? But it's always about the student learning, that you really want to take it even further. And you know the people around you and you want to enhance. Yeah.
And two things. One, Dr. Brent Much was one of my superintendents, head of schools at the American School of Dubai. And he always referred to himself as a learning leader. I always loved that because he put the learning first. But the other big thing that he is he's always curious. And he had this curiosity. Before he jumped to judgment, he was always asking questions about, how did you arrive at that? Or how did you do this? And it was just a way of bringing curiosity and lightness to the conversation and just being authentic learner. I just love that.
I love that too. I remember being at the American School of Paris with an outstanding head of school named Jane Thompson, who every year I gave out his feedback survey to my faculty, and the questions were written. There were like, 8 or 9 of them. And she said, there's no question about whether you are a learning leader for your faculty. And adding that question gave me probably the best feedback I ever received around, Dan, you need to be getting into classrooms more. You need to be giving specific feedback around my goals, or how can I become a better teacher for our kids? And that one question sort of reframed me and set beautiful goals for the next couple of years around exactly what you were talking about, Daniel.
Well, it's being inquisitive. To me, it's the inquiry mindset of looking at a situation and having those type of questions that actually elevates the person. And you can see the difference when you ask the right question, rather than those questions that actually bring them in because they don't have that, like I said, psychological safety to share. Wow. But learning leader, beautiful summary. Absolutely.
Well, it actually ties back nicely to the start of this conversation when you talked about building capacity and using time to do the right things and making sure we know how to use a meeting effectively and to build capacity around what really matters. So that was a nice tie-in to finish up, I think.
Yeah, I've just really enjoyed this conversation. I think our listeners have also enjoyed this conversation. I could go on for hours with you, Nancy. We enjoy your enthusiasm.
I know.
You're so authentic. I just really appreciate that from you. What do the next few months look like for you? What are you most excited about in the coming months?
Oh, I'm working with several schools, which I'm thrilled. I'm going to Dakar to do middle leadership. And then I got invited to be a speaker at 21st Century Conference in Hong Kong. And I've never been to Hong Kong, so I'm thrilled.
Wow.
Never been.
That's great.
So I'm thrilled. And then what I also love is we at ECIS, we have something called Middle Leaders in certain countries. Last year, we had Middle Leaders in Munich, where we had 60 something middle leaders focused on a 2-day workshop just about their role and their capacity building. I have one coming up in 2 weeks in Eindhoven. And then I have another one coming up in Amsterdam. So those to me are the thrills. And then tonight I actually have the ISL ECIS Loft, which it's just a time to chat just like this. I've been doing it for 4 years now. And it's a pleasure just to get diverse perspectives and insights. So kind of traveling, but then still sitting in my attic as I do every day. And then trying to connect with people like I'm doing today with you guys.
You know, we follow the Loft, and has that been 4 years now you've been running that?
Started it during COVID. I remember just saying, I'm lonely. Maybe I can get some friends to get together to talk. And all of a sudden, they just started coming. I was like, thank you so much. And then it just kind of exploded. And it was like, we're getting, 100 people, 50 people coming to these events. And it's just started by me writing to some friends saying, would you talk about this? And they're like, sure, I have nothing to do. I'm like, okay, come on. So it worked out.
Congratulations. That's spread around the world, I know. How do our listeners get in touch with you if they wanted to connect, talk about middle level leadership, talk about the Loft? What's the best avenue for the people to reach out?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and also email is nancy@ecis.org. So those two avenues, I'm always available. And if you want any assistance with middle leadership, it's really my passion. It's something I know the impact it has on school and school culture, and really developing that distributive model of leadership. And when schools have it, you can feel it as soon as you walk into the building. You just know it exists in a building. And I just think that, to me, is thrilling. You really can sense it with the staff, that they're empowered. Any help, just let me know.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy. It's been such a great honor to have you on our show. We've enjoyed every moment of this. Such a special time with you.
Oh, thank you.
Connecting to Blue Sky Leadership, we talked a little bit about this before we started taping, but sometimes we can think Blue Sky Leadership have these really sort of out there ideas that are really inaccessible and hard to grasp. But the idea of changing your leadership structure and distributing it more and flattening it more out for people, maybe that's really a simple way for a transition into what Blue Sky looks like, and more of a middle level leader, people owning this collective efficacy together. So I want to thank you for taking that conversation in a place that's going to be really accessible for all of our listeners, and something that's really tangible that we can all do together starting right now. And I want to echo what Daniel says. Speaking to you is a joy. Your energy comes through the screen. You're just so easy and so fun, and an outstanding educator and so inspiring. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
I loved it. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm so thrilled to be here. Like I said, I'm starting my day, and this is how I feel like I'm going to have a great day now because of you two. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Skies Leadership Podcast. Do you know a specific leader who would be a great guest? Fill out all the details at blueskiesleadership.com.